Okay, great. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Women in Democracy meeting today. This is part of Ms. Magazine's quarterly multimedia platform that provides deep and expert analyses on issues impacting full and fair representation. Today's recorded discussion with attorneys general will publish later this month for its September installment called Women Saving Democracy. And this platform is created in partnership with the Brennan Center for Justice and Represent Women. You can also tune in to a discussion with secretaries of state that we will be hosting tomorrow. So a few quick notes before we get started. We are so pleased to have this closely held invitation-only audience with us for this recording, and we really welcome your questions, which you can put into the Q&A box below, and I will pull out a few of those questions later to ask all of our speakers. But I just wanted to say that because this event is hosted by 501c3 organizations, our panelists are not going to be taking any position on any active political races or candidates, including their own. And for our journalist friends who are with us, today's discussion is off the record. And once the full Women in Democracy site goes live on September 20th, you are free to share anything and everything that you see on that platform, but just not until then. And also just for your information, in addition to these recordings, the full site will include several aligned essays and some episodes of Ms. Studio's podcast on the issues with Michelle Goodwin and 15 minutes of feminism. And we will also be sharing links and social media kits and all that good stuff to ask for your help in promoting the platform on social media. And last but not least, we are so grateful to the sponsors for this Women in Democracy installment, Michelle Mercer and Bruce Golden, Craig Newmark Philanthropies, and the Rockefeller Brothers Fund. Thank you so much for your support on these issues that we all care so much about. With that, I would now like to welcome three inspiring women leaders to the floor: the Honorable Amber McReynolds, National Elections Expert and USPS Governor, New York Attorney General Letitia James, and Michigan Attorney General Dana Nessel. Amber, the mic is yours.
Well, thank you so much, Katie, and thank you all for attending this amazing session today. And thank you to Ms. Magazine, the Brennan Center for Justice, and also Represent Women, and all of the incredible sponsors to make this very special event happen. And I'm certainly delighted to be here today with two incredible women that are demonstrating leadership and forward thinking about how to improve our systems and make our systems more equitable for everyone. This event is obviously focused on women in democracy and how women are leading on the front lines of democracy every day. And I want to share, before I introduce our incredible attorney generals that are here today, I want to just highlight a couple of things that are happening in this moment in time. First, our democracy is at an inflection point, and our civic health is at risk. And I describe it as civic health because it is really about our civic health as a society, and making sure that we figure out good ways to strengthen our democracy and make sure that it's here for generations to come, just as the founding members of our country intended, and how we've evolved over time. I mean, our democracy, when it started, left a lot of people out, and it was designed for certain people that looked just like George Washington. And now we've seen over time, in a bipartisan way, how that can change, and how the leadership amongst women, but also all people within the United States can change that over time and can build a better democracy for all. Also, I want to highlight quickly a couple of statistics that come from the presidential election. First, it was the most highly anticipated presidential election of our time in 2020, and yet only 66% of voters, nationally eligible voters, voted. That means that 1 in 3 voters, if you go to the grocery store or you're dropping your kids off at school every day, know that when you're in your communities, 1 in 3 people that you might be engaging with did not vote in the 2020 presidential election. That amounts to 80 million voters that were eligible but did not participate. And when asked why, Many of them weren't able to register to vote in time because there were outdated deadlines in their states. They might have forgotten or missed the deadline to apply for an absentee ballot, or maybe weren't eligible to get it. They might not have been able to take off work or couldn't afford to wait in line for 3 hours to vote at their polling place on election day. There's a number of reasons why people don't participate. And it's my hope that as we continue to strengthen our democracy and build a better democracy, we continue to focus on that 80 million and those 1 in 3 voters that did not participate in the most highly anticipated election of our time. Also, as part of improving our civic health, we have to be thinking about future generations and how we can better educate our students and our young people with civics education. I, for one, believe civics education needs to start in 1st grade. I myself have a 9 and 11-year-old, and I'm lucky that I live in a state like Colorado where we designed a system that puts voters first and engages people in the process and creates a very simple and secure approach to voting. And so every election that my ballot arrives at my home, my 9 and 11-year-old and I, we work on mommy's ballot, and they go through the ballot with me, and they are able to ask me questions like, what does governor do? What does attorney general do? What does school board do? And we have that civics lesson every single election. So if you're not doing that now, as parents, I would encourage you to do it. And we have to continue to help our future generations engage and learn how to engage in a positive way. So with that, I am delighted to be here today with Attorney General James and Attorney General Nessel, 2 incredible women leaders that we are lucky to all be able to converse with today about these issues. And I'd love for both of them to take a moment to introduce themselves and also highlight a moment for them in their career or their personal lives or stories where democracy or a democracy moment became critically important for the work and kind of guided them in what they're doing today. So with that, we'll start with you, Attorney General James, and thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. It's an honor and a privilege to be here. I want to thank Ms. Magazine and the Brennan Center, and I want to thank you, Amber, and of course, my colleague in government, my friend, my sister in the struggle for equality, the great Attorney General of Michigan, Dana Nessel, who I absolutely adore. So I come from humble beginnings, and that sort of instructed me on my life's path. I'm a former public defender. I represented quite a few women who were victims of domestic violence. I was known in the courts as a femme fatale because I stood up on behalf of women who oftentimes were abused. I then decided to run for office because there were not a lot of women who looked like me and women who experienced what I had experienced during my youth. And I wanted to make sure that women who have been left out of the table of democracy, their voices were heard. So I ran for city council on an independent line, a third party line, the Working Families Party line, and I won on that party line. Then went on to run for citywide office because I had never been a woman of color who had held a citywide office in the city of New York, and was successful in running for the office of public advocate. As the public advocate, resolved thousands of consumer complaints, did a list of bad landlords all throughout the city of New York, uncovered fraud in the city of New York, recovered $500 million of taxpayer dollars as a result of a fraudulent practice by then Mayor Bloomberg, who unfortunately thought that it was unwise for me to investigate his administration, but I did anyway. And then obviously have been a voice for the marginalized and vulnerable populations. And then the Office of Attorney General became available, and I decided to run for that office. And I was twixt in between running for 2 different positions. But one day at my coffee shop, there was a young woman who was an immigrant whose husband was about to be deported, asked me for legal advice. We sat down, she cried, we cried together. I provided her with legal assistance and we saved her husband from deportation. It was at that point in time the light bulb went off, that it was the law that I needed to pursue. It was justice that I needed to pursue. It was something that I've pursued all of my life, and I needed to continue on to that path of righteousness. And here I am now representing the great state of New York, continuing to stand up for vulnerable and marginalized populations, using the law both as a sword and as a shield.
Well, thank you so much, Attorney General James, and thank you for your incredible leadership. What you just said actually reminds me of one of my favorite quotes, and it's from Amelia Earhart. She actually said, "The most difficult thing is the decision to act. The rest is merely tenacity." And I think there's just so many examples of that in women in leadership. And certainly both of you are wonderful examples of exactly that sentiment. So with that, Attorney General Nessel, it's great to have you here.
Yeah, thanks for having me. God, I hate going after Tish James, always. I started my career working in Detroit as an assistant prosecuting attorney for the Wayne County Prosecutor's Office, which handles about half of all felony cases in the state of Michigan, and handled basically every kind of case you can imagine, rapes, robberies, murders. I spent a long time in the child abuse division, handling child physical and sexual assault cases and a lot of child homicide cases. But, also was in the police conduct review team. So we also investigated and sometimes prosecuted police officers who committed crimes on duty against civilians, and just a variety of different kinds of work. I left after about 11 years and went into private practice, handled a variety of different kinds of work, did a lot of work for indigent defendants as a public defender, but also handled other kinds of cases as well. But what I kind of got sort of drawn into were handling cases on behalf of the LGBTQ community, not because I had any particular area of expertise, but just because there were very few attorneys that were willing to take on those kinds of cases because we didn't have any legal protections of any kind in Michigan. And so every case became really a constitutional claim because you didn't have a body of law under which you could ever, pursue an action. So I began to bring a lot of different actions, mostly on behalf of, same-sex couples who wanted rights to their children, which Michigan was an outlier state, and that there was no means of any kind for two people in a same-sex relationship to have custodial rights to the children that they might have been raising together and could not adopt together based on our ban on same-sex marriage. So ultimately, I brought a case that challenged the ban on adoption for same-sex couples, as well as the ban on marriage for same-sex couples in Michigan. We were the third time in American history that the case, the matter of marriage equality was actually put to a trial. And we tried that case in 2014. We were victorious at the district court. We won our case. We were the only circuit at that time, the Sixth Circuit, where we lost. And so all the Sixth Circuit cases got consolidated. We went up to the United States Supreme Court in a case called Obergefell v. Hodges. In 2015, that became the seminal case that allowed for same-sex marriage nationwide and overturned all the marriage bans that existed throughout the country. Following that, I sort of had a rude awakening literally right after the decision came down, which was on a Friday, and realized that a number of people who on Monday were considered to be married because their marriages all of a sudden were recognized under Michigan law if they'd been married out of state, and saw that there were lots and lots of people that got fired on Monday when they tried to apply for benefits for their now legal spouse. So I was part of a movement to try to bring a ballot proposal to allow for civil rights under our state Civil Rights Act for LGBTQ people. And then I later brought I put together one of the first hate crimes organizations in Michigan that specifically investigated and prosecuted incidences of hate crimes against the LGBTQ community. Very serious crimes, primarily homicides, sometimes serious assault cases, robberies, criminal sexual conduct cases, but mostly homicides, mostly gay men and trans women of color being murdered. And so at this point, the organization has, I don't know, I think close to 40 convictions and no acquittals on some very, very, very serious cases, again, mostly homicides. But this happened in 2016, and there was a certain person got elected president that year. Some of us were very dismayed and not supportive of his candidacy, and so somewhat shocked at the fact that he won. You talked a lot about how few people vote, and that's what we saw in our state is very depressed voter turnout, which allowed for the election of Donald Trump. And in the early part of 2017, I got very involved in the movement to resist the Trump presidency. And, I attended more marches and rallies within a span of a handful of months than I have probably in my entire life put together. But I found myself at a particular event holding up a very poorly designed sign that people accused my children of actually making, because my artistic design ability is just so poor. And I turned to my wife and I said, I don't think Donald Trump cares that we're out here. I don't think this matters to him. If anything, I think he loves it. I have to do something else besides protest. And what I saw is that attorneys general across the nation were bringing cases against the Trump administration, and they were winning. And I saw that really as the best way to fight back against what I saw as constitutional trespasses against the people of my state. So first time ever, I ran for office in 2018. Which probably was ill-advised for that to be your very first office. Michigan's a very big state, as it turns out. But somehow I ultimately won, and I was sworn into office on January 1st of 2019, and I've had the opportunity to serve side by side with AG James and a number of our colleagues that came in that year as well. And it's really been the privilege and an honor of a lifetime for me.
That's wonderful. And both of you, I think, just highlighted some incredible issues that women elected officials face. And I'd love to have both of you, weigh in on what you see as the most important issues facing our democracy, and also to kind of lift what both of you just mentioned about violence against women, obviously in the criminal justice system, but now we're seeing election officials facing incredible threats of violence for them administering the elections and trying to administer a fair process. I know Secretary Benson in Michigan, who is a friend of mine as well, and she's done an incredible job. She's also faced a number of threats and just testified in front of Congress that way. But I just would love to hear both of you talk about this impact of the political rhetoric and the dynamics of the day, and what you see as the greatest threat facing democracy from both of your positions.
So let me just say that Dana and I are both first. She's one of the first openly gay attorney generals, the first African-American woman elected statewide. There are a number of elected officials who are texting me right now from the state of New York, who are women of color, who are just so proud of my role as the Attorney General. And I look forward to their ascendancy to higher office in the future. But what we face now is an existential threat to all that I believe in and to our democracy as a whole. There are some states and politicians in this country that are basically going to extremes to roll back fundamental rights, to ignore the 14th Amendment, whether it be the recent decision on Dodd's rollback of Roe versus Wade, voting rights, attacks on the members of the LGBTQ community, to environmental rights. And both Dana and I have at our disposal expansive powers in our respective states. to use the law both as a sword and as a shield to protect vulnerable and marginalized populations, and to basically just defend the Constitution of these United States and the Constitution of our respective states, and to protect those individuals who unfortunately right now feel the threat of those extremists. We're seeing here in New York, as Dana mentioned, a number of trans women who have been murdered. Most of them are trans women of color. We are seeing women come to New York State to seek abortions because they live in states that unfortunately have banned abortion with no exceptions for rape and for incest. We are seeing individuals who face the possibility of criminal prosecution if they assist individuals. We see medical professionals reach out to the New York State Office of Attorney General asking for guidance and for legal advice and for opinions. We are seeing floods and fires and change in our environment as a result of those who deny science. And so these are extremists. And what we need to do is come together as a country and recognize that we're all united as one, and put aside artificial constructs and the differences between us, and recognize that we live in a society, a pluralistic society, which respects the democracy and the voices of all individuals. And that's what Dana and I fight for each and every day. It is an honor and a privilege to serve as the Attorney General of the great state of New York, but it's more of an honor and a privilege to join with this wonderful organization and with my very good friend Dana Nessel and my other colleagues across this nation, standing up for justice, standing up for democracy each and every day, and fighting for those, unfortunately, who want to dismantle what we have built in this country, and recognize that the United States of America is great as it is.
That's wonderful. And AG Nessel, do you want to weigh in on that?
No, I can't top anything that AG said. So I will say that one of the differences between, her work and my work is simply that she is enviably in a blue state, and I am in a very purple state where we have a lot of divisiveness. On one hand, our executive office holders are all progressive Democratic women. And on the other hand, you have a legislature that has been very badly gerrymandered. I believe is not at all reflective of the people of my great state. And instead you have people who I don't think, like I said, not reflective properly of really how the values of the people of my state. Now that's going to change because in 2018, overwhelmingly, the voters of my state passed a ballot proposal that allowed for a bipartisan redistricting commission. So the districts have been redrawn fairly for the first time in my lifetime. And I think that we will likely have a much more balanced, more fair and more representative legislature as of next year. But in the meantime, it's caused a lot of issues because we have a legislature that really issue after issue after issue, even where you have an overwhelming amount of Michigan residents that support something, the legislature will not move it forward. And it's created a lot of consternation. Unfortunately, right now, Michigan, and I'm sad to say this, I'm a lifelong Michigander and I love this state. AG James, you're gonna have such a great time when you come and visit me and I take you all around the state. You're gonna love it. But unfortunately, we've been sort of a mecca for domestic terrorism. And, it didn't just start recently, it started a long time ago. And you might remember that Timothy McVeigh, you might not remember, Amber, you seem like you might be too young to remember Timothy McVeigh.
I do.
You might have studied Timothy McVeigh. I don't know if you were around for his actions. And obviously he was the Oklahoma City bomber, took the lives of almost 200 people in one of the worst acts of domestic terrorism that we've seen in the United States, at least in my lifetime. For a long time, both parties, both Republicans and Democrats, condemned domestic terrorism. And unfortunately, that seemingly is really no longer the case. And in fact, you have a lot of folks in my state who are either running for elected office or are in elected office that seemingly embrace ideals of white supremacy, ideals of domestic terrorism, anti-government groups. And so you've seen the rise, the proliferation of these hate groups and domestic terrorist groups in my state, which we've had to constantly beat back. And in addition to that, you have some very, very concerning threats to our democracy. And, the 2022 election, well, I know this is nonpartisan and we can't talk about specifics, but the fact is we have candidates for pivotal offices like the state attorneys general and like the state secretaries of state that, are incredibly powerful positions as it pertains to elections. Those are the chief election officer, the chief law enforcement officer, the defender of the will of the people for offices like mine and AG James. And yet you have people who are running that are election deniers or people who don't believe in the rule of law and don't really prescribe to the old-fashioned notion that the candidate who receives the most votes ought to be certified as the winner of an election. And in fact, in my state, and I see it across the country, a lot of individuals who hold elected office or are running for elected office get very upset when you call our state, or you call the United States a democracy. It's not. It's a constitutional republic. Don't call it a democracy. I've just never in my life did I think so many people would be angry about calling America a democracy. So obviously there's been all these, voter suppression efforts. And, just yesterday, again, for the umpteenth time, there was a case filed against my governor and secretary of state to still, almost 2 years later, try to decertify the results of the 2020 election, which is, but like at this point, I don't even know how many cases I've handled and have had to defend the 2020 election where one presidential candidate beat another presidential candidate by over 154,000 votes. And it's still being contested to this day. And that is such a threat to democracy. President Biden said this the other night. I couldn't have agreed with him more. He said, you can't just love democracy when your side wins. And what we're seeing is, an entire construct out there that really does not subscribe to the notion of, those who have the most votes ought to have their laws implemented or their candidates elected. And let me just give you an example, and then I'll shut up, about something that happened just in the last couple of days here in Michigan that I've been talking about. I just did a press conference this morning about it, and I filed an amicus brief on behalf of a ballot proposal called the Reproductive Freedom for All ballot proposal. Now, the United States Supreme Court said, well, the issue of abortion should never have been decided by the United States Supreme Court. It's not a fundamental right. The states are the laboratories of invention. Let's let it go back to the states. So it did. And we have a ballot proposal in Michigan that would allow for not just abortion rights, but birth control rights, which are under assault, fertility treatments under assault, and miscarriage care, which is also at issue. And, this ballot proposal received more signatures than any other ballot proposal in the history of my state. And yet we had two Republicans, unelected appointees to the State Board of Canvassers that didn't like this ballot proposal, and they rejected it from being certified to go on the ballot because they said that the spacing, the typographical spacing was not lengthy enough. And I had to actually file a brief where we showed the actual Constitution as it was written, which also has some spacing issues. I welcome you to take a look at the United States Constitution as it was originally authored, where a lot of the words seem to run together. But this is just an example of people who are in the minority. And when I say in the minority, I mean those that don't believe in reproductive freedom, trying to do everything they possibly can to stop those of us who are in the majority, people who believe in reproductive freedom, from being able to have protections that we've enjoyed in this country for nearly 50 years. So these are just all examples of many ways in which we are, I don't want to say slowly losing our democracy, I would say quickly losing our democracy. And, you know, those of us like myself, like A.G. James, are doing everything that we can in our power of our respective offices to try to fight back against the erosion of our democratic values.
Well, thank you for that. And I want to point out, you highlighted a couple of things that I just want to pull out here. So first, independent redistricting. Colorado also went through an independent redistricting ballot initiative, and we implemented that. I served on one of the commissions to implement that and helped pass that ballot initiative. And there's very few states that have independent redistricting commissions. And at least in my view, that seems to be a national baseline that we should be pursuing for all states to have, to make sure there's fairness and equality and equity in the process of redistricting, so that voters choose their politicians and not the other way around. And then the other one, A.G. James, that you brought up, you ran with the Working Families Party, so a third party initially. And one of the other data points and the trends that's been changing that I would love to hear both of your perspectives on is I think now about 45% of the country are politically unaffiliated. So, and there's a huge rise amongst young voters. So 18 to 30-year-old voters are registering at about a 60% plus rate to be unaffiliated. And so they're choosing to not have a party label, and yet they're closed from participating in many of the primaries that occur in states across the country. And so when we look at that 80 million people that were eligible that did not vote, a very large bulk of them are actually unaffiliated. And it's because they're being cut out of the primary processes, and in states where maybe the district or the state itself leans heavily either red or blue, the general elections happen in the primaries. And so states like Utah and Idaho and Wyoming, we're seeing this kind of trend of people being left out early, and they never even make it to the general election ballot because they feel like, why participate when I don't have a choice? And so some of these policy reforms, redistricting, primary reform, New York City, you just utilize ranked choice voting, and for the first time has a majority women city council. That happened in one election cycle with one model change. So I would love to hear both of your opinions about some of these system reforms, and what you see, you know, going forward, and how you think we should be thinking about this nationally, especially given our history, because a lot of people sort of immediately say, no, we don't want the federal government weighing in on election policy, but we have a history of bipartisan reforms at the federal level, whether it was suffrage or the Voting Rights Act and the reauthorization of the Voting Rights Act multiple times, the National Voter Registration Act in the 90s that created motor voter, the Help America Vote Act that was signed in 2002, right after Florida 2000 by then George W. Bush, and then multiple military enfranchisement bills that have passed with significant bipartisan support. So there's been this significant erosion really since 2016 at the federal level with regards to bipartisan election reform, and would just love to hear your opinions about how we kind of center back on what our history is in the United States of bipartisan reform for voters, to protect voters and support voters, and then also your opinions on some of these policy changes that have occurred around the country in various states.
So in New York, ranked choice voting resulted in over 28 women being elected into a 51-member body. The majority of them are women. And now I am represented by one of the first Black out gay women in New York City. She is my council member, Crystal Hudson. So the ranked choice voting was supported by many. Unfortunately, the turnout was relatively low. There was some concern with respect to the educating individuals with respect to ranked choice voting. And we hope that as we go forward, there's more of an outreach effort to educate individuals about how ranked choice voting works. But it did result in more women being elected to the New York City Council and more individuals who have diverse backgrounds. We have the first Muslim, a number of Asian American women who've been elected into the New York City Council, a number of gay members of the New York City Council. And it truly is a representative body now in the New York City Council. Two, we have independent districting commission on the statewide level. In fact, my very good friend and young sister, Assemblywoman Latrice Walker, who is listening, was really responsible for that legislation. And we thank her for her leadership in that regards. Unfortunately, as you know, our Court of Appeals decided to throw out their redistricting map, causing some confusion in the state of New York, primarily because the IDC and the state legislature couldn't agree, obviously, upon the maps. But we hope to go back to the IDC and come up with some maps which are much more representative in the state of New York. With respect to open primaries, there was it was on the ballot in New York City, a ballot that was put forward by then Mayor Bloomberg. It was rejected by the legislature, by the city of New York, primarily because of the influence of money. Individuals are obviously concerned about campaign financing. Obviously, individuals are concerned about Citizens United and the influence of money interest in the body politics is very, very concerning, particularly a lot of the dark money that we are seeing that are influencing our elections. And so it's really critically important that we repeal Citizens United, that we have campaign finance in the city and in the state of New York, as well as across the nation. I would not be in this position today, but for campaign financing. Low dollar donations is what has fueled me into public office. And I prefer small donor dollars as opposed to corporate interest and other special interests influencing the outcome of our elections. So it's so critically important. I also want to give a shout out to former council member Alika Ampry-Samuels, obviously, who was a council member Lori Cumbo, some of these small donors who have helped me, who are on the call today, like LaShawn Thompson and Charlene Gale, and of course, our borough president, my sister, who I was very involved in her campaign, Vanessa Gibson, the borough president of the Bronx. All of these elected officials, again, were propelled forward by campaign financing, which is why we need a campaign finance system and we need to overturn Citizens United.
Thank you for that. AG Nessel.
Yeah, so firstly, I couldn't possibly agree more with AG James. I'm going to say something that makes her a little uncomfortable right now, and that's this. I had a conversation with a few people about AG James, otherwise known as future President James, as I would like to see it. And someone said to me, you know what, Tish James will never be president because she's not a good fundraiser.
I hate it.
And I said, you know what, I know why she's not a good fundraiser, because Tish James would rather talk to poor people, disenfranchised people, the most marginalized among us, rather than calling up millionaires and asking for money all day, every day, because that's who she is.
That's
and
me.
And she spends too much time talking to the people in her state who need her help the most. And those aren't millionaires and those aren't billionaires.
Exactly.
So that is a problem. There's no question about it. But let me talk about two other problems that I see that are very anti-democratic in nature, and that are big problems in terms of our system of government in the United States, and that we've never seen as to me, at least in my lifetime, was never such a significant issue until what we've seen in recent days. Well, let's start off with the Electoral College. And I say this, look, I'm thrilled to have presidential candidates come and suck up to my state residents every 4 years because they so badly need Michigan to swing their way since we go back and forth. But to basically ignore the state of New York and ignore the state of California, because there's no value in even talking to people in those states once you get past the primary, I think you're disenfranchising a whole lot of people. And you end up, of course, with what we've seen multiple times during the last number of decades, which is presidents that were elected by a minority of voters. So we'll start with that. And that's why I think you end up with a United States Supreme Court that's so unreflective of the values of the people of the United States because they were appointed by presidents who didn't win the popular vote. But then in addition to that, I have never been so horrified by the workings of the United States Senate. And when you talk about a very undemocratic institution, I mean, how you have, I forget the name of the state that my wife always makes up, that is out of North Dakota, South Dakota, Montana, and what's the fourth state? Idaho, right. And it's whatever you would put together. And I mean, the state of California has more individuals who live in those states and more voters in those states than all four of those states put together. And yet you have an 8-to-2 ratio. Is that democracy? Is it really? And maybe that worked at one point, but it's not working anymore, right? And you'll have laws that are overwhelmingly popular if you look at the population as a whole in America, but you're able to stymie very popular pieces of legislation that come through the House, as gerrymandered as it is, into the Senate, because even a 50-50 Senate, we're not able to get very much done. So I mean, these are the types of things where when I was growing up and you talked about civics class, right? And I totally agree with you. Like I would like to start taking, civics class should start in kindergarten so that people understand how government works. But the fact is, understanding how government works doesn't necessarily mean that government is going to work if we have these very undemocratic ways of orchestrating elections and passing laws. And I think the Mitch McConnells of the world, they've come to see how to utilize to their advantage the fact that you can have minority rule in the United States of America. And we see it over and over and over again, whether it's in gerrymandering or whether it's some of the items that I mentioned. But like my colleague, Citizens United, I mean, there's so many bad decisions we could talk about right now in recent years from the Supreme Court, but I think it all, really started with that decision, because it meant that corporations and their money means so much more than individual people ever will until that decision has been overruled. It's a travesty.
Hey, Nessel, is your wife upstairs, downstairs?
She is. That's why I keep asking her. I'm like, what's the name of that state? Yeah. So she's working from home today too. And so I tried to get advice from her as much as possible.
Oh, that's great. Well, what was so great about what you both just highlighted is that there's not a silver bullet in terms of a reform. It's really an all of the above. And there's multiple things that are needed to improve and strengthen and make our democracy, frankly, more resilient.
Right.
Over time, that is about enfranchising people and what have you, but also addressing the real issues that exist. And, this also matches with the trust in government is the lowest it's ever been in our history. Trust at the federal level is the worst. It's better at the state level, and it's much better at the local level, primarily because people are more connected at the local level or within their states than they are at the federal level. So hopefully we can keep working on all of the above solutions. And we touched on a few of them that will move this forward. So I think, Katie, we're ready to go into Q&A. Before we do Q&A though, I do want to just give one more quote that I think was illustrated today by these incredible women that were here. And it's from Rosa Parks. And she said that the only tired she was tired of giving in. And I think there's so many incredible women leaders too that we had here today, and many of us that have been working on voting and democracy issues that live by that. And we are going to keep going regardless of how tired or how long it takes to make sure our democracy is strengthened and resilient for future generations. So Katie, I'll turn it over to you for the Q&A part.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thanks so much to all three of you. It was such a joy to kind of be able to be a little fly on the wall here and listen to the three of you talk shop. It was really great. So yes, let's move into the audience Q&A. This conversation sparked a lot of questions, so I'm just going to pick a few that we can get through in about the next 10 minutes. I'm going to start with Jennifer Weiss-Wolf. She asked, Or she said, I'm hoping that both attorneys general can talk about the way they're handling abortion access in the new post-Dobbs reality in their respective states, which both have such different challenges and opportunities. And Attorney General Nessel, you did talk a little bit already about the ballot proposal that's happening in Michigan, which is exciting. So maybe let's start with Attorney General James, and then Attorney General Nessel, if you'd like to add a little bit more, please feel free.
So there's a song that we sing in my church, and we sing in most Black churches. It's called "No Ways Tired." It's after those that quote that you just gave, and it's a hymn that we often sing. No Ways Tired. So listen, there's a lot of things that we can do, obviously, in light of the overturning of Roe versus Wade. And AG Nessel and I have filed briefs in a number of cases challenging states which unfortunately have banned abortion with no exceptions. My office is focusing on making sure that New York remains a safe haven for all who seek an abortion. My office is focused on convening. We've convened a pro bono task force of the nation's top law firms and legal reproductive rights organizations. In fact, they just had a meeting about an hour ago. We've launched a legal hotline to provide legal guidance and resources to patients, to healthcare providers, and to supporters seeking information. The hotline is 212-899-5567. That's 212-899-5567. You can also get additional information on my website. We will help doctors who may be prosecuted for providing medical help. We will help women and pregnant people who are scared and confused about their rights in their respective states and are considering dangerous alternatives to medical care. We are providing training for medical professionals and individuals, not only here in New York, but all across this nation. We also, it's really critically important that individuals know that New York will provide resources to individuals who come to our state who need financial assistance in seeking an abortion. I've joined with other attorney generals, primarily D attorney generals. We've submitted amicus briefs to oppose total abortion bans in Texas and Idaho, and in some of those red states who don't see women, who don't believe that we should have control over our bodies or over our own destiny or our own or exercise autonomy over our own bodies. We have argued that abortion care is covered by a federal law known as the Federal Emergency Care and Medical Treatment Care Act. We have stood up for medical abortion. It's really critically important as more and more women resort to getting medical abortions. It's really critically important that we provide assistance to those individuals. We had a conversation with social media and e-commerce companies last week or 2 weeks ago to remove any misinformation and disinformation, particularly as it relates to pregnancy crisis centers. When you Google the word abortion, these pregnancy crisis centers come up. And let's be honest, they do not provide abortions. They do not provide you information on reproductive care. I've heard from individuals in some of these southern states where they have been basically held against their own will at some of these centers. And those centers, unfortunately, have been providing them with a lot of misinformation, disinformation, and a lot of guilt. And so I'm really just blessed to be to represent the great state of New York, and to stand up for our democracy and to represent the interests of marginalized women, and to let everyone know that they should reach their full potential. And because there's no shame, as the kids say in Brooklyn, no shame in my game. I had an abortion when I was a city council member, and it was a decision that I made between myself and my doctor and no one else. And I, again, support a woman's right to choose. And there are those Republicans out there who unfortunately, when they say that they are pro-life, it is actually a lie, because they're not interested in providing care for women with children, not providing them with any additional food stamps, Medicaid, child care, you name it, any assistance at all. Their support for women is non-existent, and they should know that any effort to stop abortions is only going to stop safe abortions, and that individuals will resort to alternative means to medical care, and oftentimes that will be unsafe. And let's be honest, the vast majority of individuals who will be struggling to find abortions and get abortions are women of color, women who are living in poverty, women who are struggling each and every day. And AG Nessel and I are here to protect their rights and to make sure that they have access to a safe, legal, and affordable, if not free, abortion, if not in New York, in Michigan, or someone else, or some other place in this country, which is a safe haven for women. And it's unfortunate that we've gotten to this point, and that's why it's so critically important that we elect more pro-choice women, without saying who that candidate might be. But there's one on this panel right now, but we need to elect more pro-choice women. Period. Mic drop.
Attorney General Nessel, is there anything you'd like to add to that mic drop?
Yeah, well, first of all, when you talk about being pro-life, I just noticed, I'm sure AG James and maybe everybody else is aware of this. There was a federal court in Texas, it looks like, that just ruled that under the RFRA Act, that companies no longer have to provide PrEP for patients that seek it. This is a very effective medication that prevents the spread of HIV, which, as we know, is still a very deadly disease. So not pro-life for everybody, obviously, just for some people, not for all. But that being the case, I have worked really hard in my state. One of the reasons I ran for office, I was very clear about this in 2018. In fact, I did a very ill-advised campaign commercial that was not poll tested by anyone, where I was in an alley in Detroit next to my office, swinging around a hanger and talking about how, with the confirmation of Brett Kavanaugh to the Supreme Court, the United States Supreme Court now had 5 votes to overturn Roe, and it was only a matter of time. Maybe it'd be a year or 2 years or 3 years, but it was going to happen. And unfortunately, that was prophetic, and I was right. And the reason why that was so important in my state is because I knew that a 1931 law would spring immediately back into effect, prohibiting all abortions, not for rape, not for incest, not to preserve the health of the mother, only to preserve the life of the woman. But unfortunately, what we came to see very quickly, and this was, we have, I think, still the only state where we've actually had an evidentiary hearing on this matter in a case where I'm representing the governor in an effort to have that law declared unconstitutional and violative of due process rights, equal protection rights, bodily integrity. We had multiple doctors testify that they didn't know what the hell that meant, to save the life of the woman. Is there like a 60% chance she's going to die? 70% chance? Do you have to, when somebody comes in and they have an ectopic pregnancy, and that pregnancy is never going to be viable, but technically they're not dead yet, and that eventually, that could burst, the woman could bleed out. Maybe there is some other complication that will involve sepsis and a very, very bad infection. And maybe that woman's organs have to be removed. Maybe she has cancer, and you have to wait until she's at death's door until you can treat her. The fundamental equal protection violation in that we never regulate men's bodies this way. The government doesn't have a say. If you have testicular cancer, if you have prostate cancer, if you just want to get a vasectomy, the government doesn't get involved at all. Not true with women's bodies. The government feels just fine regulating women's bodies in a way that men's bodies are never subject to being politicized or regulated. And really, these doctors emphasize just how many women they estimated either would have profound health complications as a result of the law or just outright die. And the fact that so many seem totally fine with that is honestly, it's a source of sadness to me that I can't even fully express, that there are people who just don't see women as full humans. And feel free to regulate our bodies. So I've been working very, very hard on a couple of different cases. The one representing the governor, we were able to get a preliminary injunction in place. That's being appealed. So the 1931 law cannot at this point be implemented again. It's a felony in Michigan. It's a 4-year felony, not just for a physician, for a nurse, for a receptionist, or for the woman herself in the event that it's medication related pregnancy that she self-administers, then she also can be charged under the law and put in prison for, for having an abortion. I'm not going to stop fighting. I ran because I saw this fight coming, and I'm going to continue to fight. And I think that in my state, at least, we're going to prevail. But that's not going to be the case in a whole lot of different states. So I hope one day to be able to emulate the work that E.G. James has done in New York, and to be a safe haven for women all across the Midwest. But for right now, we are not that state, and we have to make sure that whether it's through a court ruling or whether through its ballot proposal, that we ensure the protection of the many millions of women of reproductive age in my state.
And can I just say that given Clarence Thomas's decision, individuals need to understand that he wants to open up the door to all cases covered by the 14th Amendment. And that's Oberfeld, that's Griswold, Brown, Loving versus Virginia. So the right to marry, the right to reproductive care, the right to interracial marriage, all of that is what he would like to open. This truly is a radical United States Supreme Court, and individuals need to understand what is at stake. And what is at stake is everything that we believe in. And that's why it's so critically important that the Brennan Center and this and this organization, that we get women out to vote. Not only are young people registering in record numbers, but women are registering in record numbers. And I want to say we need to follow the example of Kansas and come out in major numbers in November and vote for reproductive care, vote for privacy, and vote for having autonomy over our own bodies.
Hear, hear.
I don't know, guys, I'm not sure if you're passionate enough about your jobs and what you do. We might need a little more passion. No, thank you all so much. That already brings us to the hour, which is crazy. I wish we had more time, but I know you all are very busy. We need to let you get back to saving our democracy. So I'm just going to wrap us up here. Thank you all so much again, Amber, Attorney General James, Attorney General Nessel, for your time today. And to our sponsors, Michelle Mercer and Bruce Golden, Craig Newmark Philanthropies, and the Rockefeller Brothers Fund for their support and their interest in these critical issues. I just want to give our audience another quick reminder to keep an eye out for the launch of the Women Saving Democracy platform, which is going to come on September 20th. And that's where you'll be able to see recordings of this session and then essay series and podcasts, like I mentioned earlier. And then we will also be sending you some follow-up information on the launch. And another reminder, tomorrow we are hosting the second of this series. But tomorrow it'll be a conversation with Secretaries of State Tahisha Way from New Jersey, Shannon Bellows from Maine, and Lee Chapman from Pennsylvania. And we really hope to see you there. So thank you all again so much for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Bye, everybody.
Good day.
Thank you.